On this last day of the 2024 Widening the Pipeline virtual training, I want us to focus on the issue of moving forward after a difficult period. Once again, it's the art of the pivot. It's how to master the ability to move through challenges and still come out who you are and what you're about. We are privileged this morning to hear from a man who actually spoke to the very first Widening Fellowship class in March of 2022. Terry Samuel, at the time, was managing editor at NPR, and was in charge of really directing coverage for the network. This is after a long career in, quote, print
Correct.
journalism. So I know we'll want Terry to talk about the pivot to broadcast. But right now, in this moment in time in his career and his life, he is the chairman of the board of the National Press Foundation.
Woohoo!
So I felt no pressure at all in asking him to come in and speak with us today. But the main thing you'll need to know about Terry's career and his energy is that Terry has been someone who is, in so many points in his career and life, had to assess the environment, make some decisions. I want you to talk about that time in Charlottesville or wherever it was that you told us about the first time around. But he's someone who has, I think, deeply rooted in who he is and his purpose as a journalist. And as I told you out in the hall, I would love for you to really lean into that theme that was one of the most popular comments we saw in the evaluations for the first training, which was finding your tribe in this business and how it may be more important in this business than just about any other. So, Terry Samuel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you. I don't think it's more important in this business than in others, but I think that we neglect it more than most other people because we think we are sometimes just doing this kind of God's work, and we don't always pay attention to how we do it and the people with whom we do it, which after a while you come to realize is singularly the most important thing. And I mean, what is special about the work is that it is very human work. I mean, what you're doing is telling stories that help people live. I mean, it is as simple as that. I think over time I have come to be maybe a little obsessed with the culture of newsrooms, which is why I think this program is so important. And the reason is I have seen kind of the value of creating space for people to do the best work and how that changes not just individual lives and careers, but literally the importance of the work overall. I mean, we've had all the discussions about DEI and, having newsrooms that reflect the communities they cover, and well, that's true. But I think when people understand that the absolute bottom line value of what we do is we help people live better lives by telling their stories. And the problem we've had for a long time is, and maybe we're back to that, is that people didn't see themselves. People don't see themselves in our coverage. That's been happening to poor and Black communities forever. It's women have been marginalized in coverage, and you just go down the line of people who don't see themselves in what we do, and the only way to fix that is to have people who understand those stories and can tell them.
Let me ask you to start, because one of the themes that we have and through all our trainings is lived experience. So why don't you just give them a quick primer your experience, where you're from, and how you came to journalism as your career.
Lived experience. It's a metaphor for being old. So I grew up in Trinidad, didn't know any journalists, didn't know any writers. And I could literally trace my interest in my journalism career begins because I fell in love with words as opposed to, wanting to change the world. I think a lot of people in my generation became journalists because they saw Watergate. They saw the press bring down the powerful. That wasn't me. I went to the public library at the corner of Knox and Frederick Street in Port of Spain, Trinidad, and I checked out a Hardy Boys book, number 19 in the series, The Disappearing Floor. And I read the whole thing in one night. And it was just a story, right? And so I went back the next day and I got 3 more, because that's all you would get. And by the time I got to college, I was in New York, at the City College of New York, and I did what any immigrant kid in the 80s would do, probably any immigrant kid. I was an engineering major, because that was easy to explain. Sophomore year, 300 level organic chem. You, sir, are not an engineer. It was, I was still young enough where I thought I could muscle through everything. And I just failed the class. Just didn't withdraw, didn't get it incomplete, a straight up F. But this idea of writing and words was kicking around because at some point, even before this, I went to work for the newspaper, the college newspaper. And I only ended up at the newspaper because I was in the student union looking for the radio station. Because here's what my idea of a journalist was back then. You were on TV, and you did a report, and at the end, you signed off from wherever you were. Michael Lee in New York, or, whoever. And I remember just the ABC guys. And so I was like obsessed with names like Biloxi, Mississippi, and so I went looking for the radio station, and I couldn't find it. And I put my head into an office and said, "Hey, do you know where the radio station is?" And the guy inside said, "Why?" And I said, "I want to be a reporter." It happened to be the newspaper office. And an hour and a half later, I left with 3 assignments. 2 years later, I was the editor-in-chief of the campus. And the executive editor of the New York Times at that time had been the editor-in-chief of the campus 40 years earlier. So I was on my way at that point. Anyway, I get out of New York and I get a job in Roanoke, Virginia. And the part of that story that everybody loves is that I covered Bedford County, which is outside, and so I did everything: courts, schools, parades, Klan rally. That was a big hit. And then I got out of there and I went to Philadelphia. But the thing about the Roanoke job, which I still like to describe as the best thing that I ever did, was I was not from there. I didn't know anybody there. The way I had to cover it was to get to know those people, get to know what was important to them, and tell their stories over and over again. And so I just hung out. I would get in my car and I would see some guy on a tractor and I would pull up to the fence and I would wait. And he would go back and forth, and then suddenly he'd come over and he'd talk to me. And when I knew it was time to go, I was doing, funny, we get back to names. I was doing a story on the weird names in the county. Some of them which were very simple. Like there's a place called Big Island, which was neither big nor an island. There's a place called White House because on the corner was White House. And there was a whole long list of those. So I go talk to this guy who's like 90. And so he knows all the stories. He's been there his whole life. And he says to me at the end, he says, "So you must be from around here." I was like, hell no, I gotta go. I gotta get out of here. But the point was I had gotten to know the place. I gotta get out of here. And 6 months later, I was in Philadelphia.
You gotta tell them about the Klan rally story. I've covered one too, so it's kind of a mark of rite of passage.
So maybe 83. And the rule was at that point, don't give them too much publicity, too much oxygen, but don't ignore them because sometime, was it 79 in Greensboro, there was a Klan rally and a couple of people got killed. So make sure you pay attention to them. So they announced that there's a Klan rally in Bedford one Saturday. And at this point, this is my county. I gotta stop doing that. I do that all the time. I was like, really? So I call up the guy. Klan rally's on Saturday. I call him up on Friday and say, hey, this is Terence Samuel from the Roanoke Times. I want to talk to you about your plans for tomorrow. Why Bedford? How many people you're expecting? Blah, blah, blah. And now I have my B matter for whatever I decide to do tomorrow. And I say, well, I guess I'll see you tomorrow. At this point, Bedford County's mine. It's mine. So I get there, and we're taking it casually. So I'm in shorts. And it's easy to see the guy I talk to because he's got the whole thing going on. So I start walking toward him. Just picture this, right? Klan rally, people in hoods, black guy in shorts, walking up to the guy. Notebook in my pocket, but still. And they have a bunch of state troopers there because, what if, right? And as I'm walking to him, I can feel them closing in. You could just feel it. And I hear this. Leave him alone, he all right. And it's the sheriff I talk to every day. He's like, and I was like, yeah, it may be time for you to get the hell out of here. But I walk up to the guy and I do what I always do when I interview somebody. Hi, I'm Terence Samuel. And he doesn't know what to do. So he puts his hand out. And you just hear click, 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 click. Cameras everywhere. And so somewhere in the archives is me shaking hands with the Klan guy.
And you said, what, 6 months later you were in Philly? Your nerves were shot by that point. When I was coming up, the Inquirer was like literally almost one of the big jewels in the crown of Knight Ridder. And did you feel any pressure going to work at the Inquirer?
Yes. Oh my God. I kind of forgot what that was like. So there are a few places you wanted to go. The New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, the Inquirer. We were especially obnoxious at the Philadelphia Inquirer. We used to say, I can't tell you how often I heard this. In fact, I heard it as recently as last Friday. Somebody says, pound for pound, we were the best newspaper in the country.
The Inky, as they called it.
Yeah. Look, we did a lot of great stuff. It was a great place to learn how to write. It was a writer's newspaper, and it was doing a lot of local news, which is very different from what came later when I went to U.S. News and the Washington Post and NPR, and so. I mean, I kind of wanted to be. I kind of wanted to be one of the big shots, and all the big shots were covering politics. And my city editor said to me, "Dude, you're a great street reporter. Embrace your gifts." Exact words, which I repeat to young people all the time. Embrace your gifts. What I ended up doing in Philadelphia was writing a lot about the city. The big news about me lately is that I left USA Today on January 1st. It was quite dramatic. It was the New York Times. And I wasn't ready to go. So it was news. But one of the things that flowed from that, and when I talk about finding your tribe, this is the value. Essentially, I get fired, and it's in the New York Times. And like everybody I have ever worked with is like on the phone going, "Are you okay?" But here's the thing. I got a call from a guy named John Randolph who said, "I had no idea where you ended up." And he didn't want to talk about USA Today at all. He wanted to talk about a story I wrote in 1991. I went to his office. It was a story about how the city of Philadelphia was not making good enough use of its waterfront. There was a little bit of stuff happening on the Delaware, but the school, anybody here from Philadelphia? That actually makes me happy. Have you had to deal with Eagles fans lately? God almighty. Anyway, the Schuylkill is the river that runs right through the middle of the city. On the west side of the Schuylkill is West Philadelphia. And it was just overgrown railroad tracks, just poor use of the city. And this guy wanted to build a walkway. And so I wrote the story. He called me up after the dramatic departure from USA Today, and he says, "So that story appeared in the paper on Saturday. On Monday, I got a call from," no, he said, "On Saturday, I got a call from the executive director of the Pew Charitable Trust, Rebecca Rummel, who said, 'Come to my office on Monday.'" He goes to the office. He walks out with a $50,000 grant and a letter of recommendation for another $50,000, for which they write the plans and they start raising money for what is now, I think, 3.5 miles from the waterworks all the way. It's beautiful. And he says, "That wouldn't have happened without you." And I was like, you know what? That's a pretty good day's work. So, and I think that's the value of having done local news, when you understand that it really could impact people's lives. I mean, that's just a completely different neighborhood because of that walkway. It's a completely different city because of that walkway. And, you know, I've interviewed Nelson Mandela. I have interviewed Barack Obama and George Bush and Bill Clinton, and the walkway story. And there's another story about when I was a cop reporter in Roanoke. I'm working nights, and I hear on the radio, murder-suicide. I was like, all right, I'm going. And then I realized it's like 2 hours away, and I was like, I'm not going. But I write it, and it's in the paper the next day. And I find out that the funeral is, I don't know, Saturday or something. So I go to the funeral. Black family. For once, easier to fit in. Old country church at the side of the road. And I'm in the, and the story is this. 75-year-old man shoots his mother, who is 90-something, and then shoots himself. Tragic. Tragic, tragic, tragic. I'm in the funeral though, and the guy a sister of the guy who did the shooting and daughter of the mother says, I know a lot of you think that this is a tragedy, but this is really a love story. And I was like, that's either the lead or the kicker. I don't know what, but that's going in the story. So I go up to her and I was like, and what she says is, he was his mother's only caretaker. He got cancer. He didn't know how he was going to take care of her or if anybody would be able to take care of her. So he made a hard choice. And I was like, whew. So I go up to this woman after, and she does this thing. Come over to the house. Let's eat. And so I'm now in the house. I see where it happened. I get like the whole history of the family. And this is in the time before cell phones. And I don't know if photo editors do this anymore, because they probably don't have to. But as I'm going out the door to the funeral, he says, make sure you get a picture. So I finally ask for the picture. And they say, the only one we have is that one hanging on the wall, and it's huge. It's a big portrait wedding picture. And I'm outside myself, watching myself take my shoes off, climbing on these people's couch, and taking the picture off the wall. The picture's important. So I write the story.
So wait, you had to bring like a literal photo with you. You didn't have a camera.
I did not have a camera.
Okay.
I had to take,
Took that family's photo.
took the family's photo, put it in a garbage bag,
Okay.
put it in the trunk.
And then you like scan it in, or they have a camera?
I don't know what they did. They did, they're fancy professional. They had cameras and so I write the story. I have a few days, and it's because it's now not a story about the funeral. It's not a story about the thing. It's this thing about this family. It's in the Sunday paper. I feel really good about it. And a few weeks later, I have to take the photo back. So I do, 2 hours. I give it back. And another relative, one who wasn't that happy to have me there, says, thank you for that story, because this was a really hard thing to explain to our friends and our family. And what we would do is we would send them your story, and that made it easier. Never felt more useful in my life. And I think that sense of being able to serve, that kind of deeply human thing that we all do and need, is what's kept me going for all this time.
I want to have you speak to something that one of our first day speakers, I asked her about, and that is, this is Sylvia Foster Frau.
Mm-hmm.
And the theme of her session was when the real prize is your passion and being able to do what you want to do. you've had this amazing career, Inquirer, Washington Post, U.S. News and World Report.
I've worked everywhere.
NPR. You worked everywhere, but very high profile everywhere is the point. So, talk to the journalists about, having to sort of make those kinds of moves into those sort of settings. Um, is there? I asked you earlier, but is there pressure? Is it? What's the common denominator, whether you're at the Washington Post or NPR?
Um, so, two things. One, figure out what it is whatever that passion is. For me, it turned out to be wanting to write well. It really was about the words. And when I talk about finding your tribe, it's not just people who can support you but people who understand you. Because being somebody who just wants to write early on can be, in some newsrooms, people could be dismissive. That was not the case at the Inquirer. But in a newsroom like the Washington Post, where it is so politics driven, I mean, a lot of great writers, they're in style. And I'm not saying that writing is not important. It is. But find out the thing that you love and find the other people who love it too. Not only so you could learn from them, but that you have, as you try to work out what it is that you're trying to do, you need to find your tribe so that you have people to talk it through with and work it through with. One of the first big stories I ever worked on was this double murder, again, in Lynchburg. The important detail was that the people who found the bodies had been calling for days. And then they finally decided to go check. And the lead of the story that I wrote was, the phone rang unanswered. And the guy I was working with, the reporter, just thought that was the dumbest thing ever. He's like, the phone rang unanswered. What are you talking about? And we thought about it for days. For days. But it was because he cared. I mean, he cared about the words. I cared about the words. And you need that. Whether you're making TikToks or writing or graphic design or editing, whatever it is, find people who care about what you care about so that you're not just kind of flailing around, feeling like you're doing this alone. And newsrooms are notorious for not, they don't know how to teach. And so you literally have to steal it sometimes. You have to steal it. So if you see somebody doing something that you want to do, go sit next to them. How do you do that?
Well, I want to jump in here because one of my big concerns in recent years has been the fact that certainly during COVID and post-COVID or ongoing, many young people who start out in the business
Or remote.
are remote. And
I don't know how y'all
when
do
you
it.
and I were coming up, it was the guy who sat in the corner office or the lady who sat two rows over, and you could literally walk up to them. So what do we tell these young folks who are, often figuring it out at home or?
I think the mechanics of how you do it You probably know better than I do. But literally find the people who are doing what you want to do and connect with them. If that means calling them up and saying, hey, do you want to have coffee? Or, I mean, I know people, during COVID, I had like weekly Zooms with my friends. We called it a happy hour, but it was mostly talking about how we got our work done. You know Les Payne, of Les Payne. Les Payne was the managing editor at Newsday. And he was the one who said Newsroom's notorious for not transferring knowledge. And so if you see somebody doing something, steal it. So I stole that from him. And you know that there's a kind of basic truth to how you get good at something, right? That you care about. You find people who are doing it, who are interesting to you, and you kind of model yourself after them. You asked what my first job in Philadelphia was. My first job in Philadelphia was in the suburbs covering Chester, Darby Borough, and Darby Township. My last job at the Inquirer in the city, I mean, those are the three of the poorest communities in the Philadelphia region. When I left, I was covering Northwest Philadelphia, which includes Chestnut Hill, which is the richest part of the city. I forget where I was going with that. So that was my first job in Philadelphia. My first job in this had something to do with stealing. It'll come back. It'll come back.
It'll come back to you. One of the things, before I open it up, because I want them to have the opportunity to really address you, but the remarks you made at the recent NPF Advisory Board reception resonated with me when you said, we've been through a pretty bruising political season and whatever, but journalism writ large, we've got important work to do over these next few years. And without, getting into specifics of woe is me, Trump's back in office, share with the journalists your thoughts about how to gird their loins and be ready for, particularly when we've had such a bruising time this year.
How many people here cover politics? A lot. So sorry. I used to be the White House editor at the Washington Post. My last day as White House editor at the Washington Post was January 21st, 2017. So I handed off when Trump came into office. And I get these LinkedIn alerts, and there's an open job as White House editor at the Washington Post, and I just laugh and laugh and laugh. I was like, that's going to be so hard. Look, I think, one, it's important. Two, I think it's a really good story, and it's important that that people who care about it do it well. It's going to be exhausting, but I think you guys are up for that. More broadly, I think the problem we've had, and there's a lot of kind of sad and sorry postmortems about how the press did during the last election. I think we did what we do really well. We cover campaigns and candidates and the contests, and we do that really well, and we did. What we don't do well is cover the country. we don't talk to people enough about what's going on in their lives and what they're pissed off about. And I think we just have to keep at that. I mean, this is usually framed in the context of the death of local news. But I've been saying for all the years since I've run big national newsrooms, every story is a local story. If you care about the audience, and if you care about the impact on the audience, then every story is a local story, and it ought to be framed and told that way. I was intrigued by the coverage of the United Healthcare shooting. We got all the right things, right? But there was this weird undercurrent of people get it because people have been mad about healthcare. We've done a pretty good job of covering that. And so I don't think anybody was surprised when there was this weird kind of detached support for this guy because he went after a healthcare executive. Bizarre, but not surprising, given what we know about healthcare in this country. And this, nobody thinks you ought to like walk around shooting people. But the way that healthcare impacts people's lives in this country was suddenly this weird undercurrent of that story, and I found that interesting.
I'll be honest, I think the most surprising thing to me was that he came from a rich family. They could have afforded health care. So that was what was interesting to me. Are there any questions? Let's start with you and introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you so much. Nusrat Rahman with the Detroit Free Press. So I have two questions. The first one is, what ended up being the lead of the story of the double murder? Like, which reporter won over? And the second question is, I was really intrigued when you talked about writers' newsrooms, because that's initially part of the reason why I got into journalism was the love of writing. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about pathways to writers' newsrooms these days. Do you feel like that still exists?
They're harder. It's much harder. I think newsrooms don't think about themselves that way anymore. It's how fast can we get it up? Can we get the alert up? I would say so here's what I did in Philadelphia. I just kind of leaned into, guaranteed this was a different time. I just took advantage of every opportunity on my beat to turn it into something that I wanted it. And I think that's the key. Figure out how. There was this weird column that they did. It was kind of like Metropolitan Diary, like here are things that are happening in the city. And I volunteered to do it for a week because it was just, you could do anything with it. And once I decided that I wanted to do something with it, again, I think you will find newsrooms where there are editors who care about it, and there's a place for it, and you gotta just. I won, by the way. That was the lead of the story.
Hi, my name is Caroline Colvin. I'm a DI reporter for Industry Dive. Thanks for speaking with us today. My main question is about relationship building with sources. So before, when I was in lifestyle journalism, it felt more casual and conversational and easy to talk to people. But now I'm a labor reporter and I write about really serious, uncomfortable, often embarrassing things for companies. So how do you go about building those source relationships in a more tense beat? And also making the source know they can trust you and that you won't exploit their story.
You think labor is more serious than entertainment?
So I wrote lifestyle. So I wrote like dating and relationships, which actually it is important. And there was like an educational component of it. But I feel like people were more forthcoming, even with their more personal stories. But with labor and work, I think that's definitely something people hold close to their chest. Because I think they're also afraid of retaliation sometimes too.
So I think, so you frame this as relationship building with the sources. Think about who it is that is served by your journalism. And in that way, that's anybody who's got a job, anybody who's got a kid looking for a job, anybody who is trying to switch, anybody who is working from home and not sure where that's going to go. I mean, my relationship with sources always was based on it is the thing that they care about. They care about it a lot. And once you demonstrate that you care and are as careful with their stories, I think that's the way you go about it. And the advantage, I think the advantage, the way to take advantage of, because I mean, what I hear is people are careful because they're used to dealing with a certain kind of reporter on this beat. Just don't be that kind of reporter.
Heard you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for speaking with us, Terence. I'm Kayla Sharp from Bloomberg Industry Group, and I wanted to ask you about how you balance being in control of both your career and your newsroom, whether you're a leader or whether you're an employee. So, you talked a little bit about leaving USA Today, which is something that you didn't plan to do. And I was wondering if you could, there have been times in my career, and I'm sure in other people's career, where maybe you know that you can be in charge of your successes or your gifts, as you talked about. There are things that you can really take ownership of. But I think there's also an importance of being aware of like the things that are kind of above your pay grade. Like if your newsroom leadership, your board, your editor-in-chief, your CEO has different goals with resources or financial audience. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you balance taking ownership of the things that you can be in control of, whether it's yourself, your team, your relationship with your colleagues, and how to figure out when it's time to accept the things that are above your pay grade. And whether it's time to move on or whether it's time to like just accept kind of the situation in your newsroom, and how do you kind of make all of those things marry themselves in a way that's still being true to your career and what you want, while also not trying to smash your head against a wall that might be above your control?
A lot there. So I think it goes back to kind of your own ideals. What it is that you believe in, what it is that you want to do, and just to reinforce, and who are you doing it with? And so it is a difficult time in this business. There's a lot of smashing your head against the wall. Budgets are tight. The business model is not working. We don't have the same pipeline from local to national. We are working with people who have elaborate business models of misinformation so they can make money, so that they can counter what you do. And I think what you have to be clear about is what it is that you and your organization is about. and then lean into that. I'm going to keep talking, and hopefully I will answer the question. I went to USA Today and I'm not sure when I developed this. The clear goal was to kind of build a news model that was kind of the service-oriented thing that I talked about. Make sure you're thinking about the audience. I did a couple of things to address that. I named my chief political correspondent, and that person lived in Louisville as opposed to in Washington. I set up a political narrative team and of 6 people, 1 person in Denver, 1 person in San Francisco. The editor was in Boston, 1 person in Washington. I'm forgetting somebody. But it was kind of move the story closer to the people doing the story. From July 2023 when I got there to July 2024 when I left, the audience grew 26% year over year. At a time when the Washington Post lost 50% of its coverage. And so I felt pretty good about that. The other thing was fixing the newsroom. This newsroom had been battered by layoffs and furloughs and just kind of management misadventures over many years. I had to fix that. I mean, my measure of success is who wants to come to work for me and who wants to go out and do the stories that serve people. And I think over time that happened. One of my senior leaders described it as, she said it was very healing for the newsroom. And I realize over time I have become obsessed with the cultures of newsrooms. Because we got a lot of problems, just because we're complicated people. But there are 2 things. Think of what we ask people to do. We ask people to be fearless, to go after the President of the United States, ask questions, just people in power. We ask them to do that all the time, which means you have to be fearless. And then I think the other thing we need is to not be condescending to the people we're covering it for. So you ask people to be both fearless and not condescending, and you've been in newsrooms, you know, those people are hard to find. But I think as an organization, we can pull it off. And that is all based on kind of the culture you create in newsrooms. And I did those 2 things, and I was very happy. Look, I got fired because I had a boss who wanted me to run the newsroom differently than I was running it, and I think she made the correct call that I was not the person to do that. So
I'm just going to echo. Did you pass the mic up to Julian? I'm going to echo a bit of advice I shared on Monday, I believe it was, advice that I got from Robert Magruder, a legend in this business. He was at the Detroit Free Press. Pick the hill you want to die on. So in other words, in a whole slew of challenges, the one that you would quit or be fired over is the only one you should lose sleep over and, sort of spend a lot of excess time worrying about what I should do. Really be thoughtful and mindful about whatever approach you're going to take or analyze the problem carefully. But when you make that pick, be 100% true to it. It's helped me in so many different scenarios where, whether somebody said something or looked at me funny, and do I want to get into it with that person and aggravate the problem? So that's just something I wanted to do. Who's next, Julian?
Hey, Terence, Julian Srappery, Boston Globe. You strike me as a thoughtful guy, and something that has really, I don't know, I guess bothered me about the news business. And I mean, you referenced it a little bit, but why is it that you think newsrooms are so dysfunctional? I mean, it's just like, it's not like one, it's like every single one I feel like are dysfunctional, especially in an industry where, purportedly we're all supposed to have good people skills, right? We're all supposed to care about human beings. And it seems like when people move up the, managerial ladder, they lose that, or I don't know what happens, but we don't know how to pass on information. We don't know how to run a good business. I mean, what is it about the industry that, people are treated so poorly? I don't know. It's just weird to me.
That's the why are editors such assholes question. Look, I don't think they're more dysfunctional than most other places. But you have no idea how intense, you do, how intense it is to be, you have to be this high level functioning human being at all times, because you're dealing with, you're not doing a report that's going to come out a year from now. You're not writing a book that's going to come out 3 years from now. You're doing it, and it's happening in 20 minutes, or it's happening the next day, or it's happening on the weekend. God, I feel like I understand the question, and I don't know the real answer why they're so dysfunctional.
Well, there are a couple of things that I would add, and that is, I think the people who are attracted to the business and who want to be in the business, speaking solely for myself, deeply neurotic people who kind of thrive and they're fueled by, whatever. The other thing is the people who run the business have so many competing masters, the advertisers and the SEO and the public, and there's just so much that the people who are in charge have to deal with that for me personally, I think a few of the ones that I've worked for have just made the decision to check their humanity at the door and just be, I got to do what it takes to get this product out the door. And it's just layers of things. I think, again, to get back to the neurosis, fortunately, my neurosis turned me into somewhat of a mother hen type or whatever. Other people's brands of neurosis turn them into jerks. But to echo Terry's point, newsrooms probably aren't more messed up than other workplaces.
But let me add this though. Because of this idea that we're serving the public good, we're being fearless, the people who thrive in that environment and the people who rise to management don't always have sufficient appreciation and regard for what it means to be a good manager. And so in a lot of places, you are making it up as you go along. And if you're managing the people the way you manage the work, it's a disaster. You can manage the journalism really, really well, but you have to lead the people. And that is a whole different set of, that is a different skill set. Because you end up with this amazing collection of really talented, really smart, really thoughtful people who by the mere fact that they're in proximity with each other, that's what makes the newsroom electric, right? It's also what makes the place insane unless it's managed well.
That's such a good point, because the things that make a person a good writer or a good investigative reporter, and they win the awards and they get moved up to the editor role, they may just not have the personality or the ability to manage.
I mean, I was one of those reporters who I love not talking to my editors for days at a time. Just leave me alone. Just leave me alone. Goodbye. Because what I wanted to do was I'd go and I'd come back with this jewel, right? And I'd go, look at me.
And then leave me alone for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Just stay away from me. We are.
And now when you don't talk to your editor or supervisor for 20 minutes, you got a problem. So I had to get rid of that.
We, in terms of our schedule, are somewhat tight, so we'll take one more question. Terry will be around and be available, but Bradford.
Terence, thank you for coming. My name is Bradford Davis. I'm a member of the editorial board of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. So my question to you is going back to what you said about newsrooms not being places where skills are transferred well. And, I guess it's kind of connected to Julian's point, but it does seem to be a pretty consistent dysfunction of our industry where younger people aren't getting the skills they need to have long, sustainable careers. I mean, that is the purpose of this fellowship, is to fill in that gap that does not happen. But, you've had pretty extensive leadership experience in newsrooms. You've obviously been a reporter for a long time, but also a leader. How do you see, I guess, management and leadership and how can they create environments that really cultivate, their younger talent to do great things for their career as long as they want it to last?
Two things. First, you have to create an atmosphere where everybody understands that we're here to do great things. And if you're here, you're part of that. That's, I think, number one. And the second thing is I just force collaboration. I just force people to work together. I force people who know how to write, with people who know how to report, with people who know how to do data analysis. And I mean, the slightly surprising thing, maybe not so surprising, is that, we talk about skills transfer from more accomplished, more veteran journalists to less or so. Well, we're in a world where the skills that young people bring to the newsroom are very much absent in some veterans, and they need to learn from each other. And so I ran track in college, and my perfect idea of a team is 4 people who can do different things working together. I mean, in place of trainings and brand bags and all those things, I think you just have to create an atmosphere where collaboration is key.
This has been an incredible opportunity for us to learn from a veteran, legend of sorts in the business. And so I just want to take this opportunity to thank Terence Samuel for coming to join us today. So let's show Terence our appreciation.